Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Enjoy speaking, especially to veterans. Everybody here a veteran? Almost everybody? Great. Good. Thank you all for what you've done. I guess my next question is, we're going to talk about negotiating. We're going to talk about leases, but give me a sense of, does anybody here actually actively own a small business now? Operating one? You do? What is it?
Similar to PTAC, where we have businesses with government contracts.
All right.
Add in through the process.
And what kind of things do you supply to the government?
I don't actually supply. We do some consulting, and we have some software solutions to help those businesses understand the process.
Great. Good. Has anybody here ever negotiated a lease? Just want to know where I... All right. So you've done that too. Again, you got the experience in the room, man.
Well, unsuccessful experience, in my opinion.
Well, we'll see if we can't change that a little bit. So as Thomas mentioned, my name's Steve Burke. I'm with a group here in Washington called the Small Business Development Centers. I've also got a colleague of mine here, John Rodenberg, who I think has spoken to you before. So we've got 27 centers around the state, colleagues of mine, and we spend our days advising small business owners. So when that time comes that you do get closer to being in business and want to take a look at the entire scope of it, please contact one of us. I've got a couple brochures up here. Thanks to John, we've got a little map of where our centers are around the state. So we're pretty much located within easy connection anywhere that you might be in the state. So please look us up. We'd be happy to help you. Our advising, by the way, is no cost to the client. It's not free because we're full-time paid employees, but and John and I are both employees of Washington State University, which is where our lead office for our network is based out of. So, all right, negotiating. We're going to talk about some concepts of negotiating first, and then we're going to move into negotiating leases. As Thomas alluded, negotiating leases can be both tricky and complicated. And as you can imagine in negotiating, what you know and what your skill level is has a direct bearing on your overall success. So I come from the position that any negotiation needs to be a win-win as opposed to win-lose, or in some cases lose-lose. So let's talk about what negotiating isn't. Negotiating isn't confrontation. And I think that that's a real key thing you want to keep foremost in your head. If you approach negotiating as a confrontation, you're going to probably almost certainly wind up behind before you get started. It's about gaining something, possibly an advantage, and giving something in return. But unlike confrontation, the successful negotiator never walks away completely empty-handed, right? Negotiating is reaching an agreement. Reaching an agreement means you get some or all of what you want, and the other party gets something in return. Everybody needs to get something out of it. Sure, you may get something more, they may get something more, but at the end of the day, negotiating is going to be a lot more successful if you approach it from the standpoint of, what can I give up? What do they need? What do I need? In real negotiation, both sides feel that they are gaining something which is the basis for both parties to agree. That's why this is called win-win. I often tell my kids, by the way, I've got 3 teenage boys. Well, one of them's now a junior in college. He's just past that frame into real adulthood. Still wondering how that's going to work out for him, but but the other 2 are definitely teenagers, and I constantly need to remind them that the first person who gets mad tends to lose. So, everything is negotiable. Develop a mindset that believes that everything is negotiable and that you can gauge others in negotiation, and that you'll look past all of the signs that suggest otherwise, such as price tags, policy statements, disclaimers, and yes, commercial leases. Oftentimes, commercial leases are set up to say, here's the lease, take it or leave it. Right? It's exactly the way they frame it. And why? Because they want everything that's in that lease to say what it says. We'll talk more a little bit about that in a second, but let's get into some real keys of negotiating. Successful negotiating, key number 1. We're going to talk about 5. Look beyond the rules we've been taught to accept without question. And that goes for a lot of things. Truth is that really just about everything is negotiable. So it's got to start by at least questioning, maybe in your own mind, in terms of where you can have a win-win for you and the other party, odd, unreasonable, or unfair policies. Seeking solutions that meet your objectives and the objectives of the policy and the rule. Key number 2, you have to find the decider. You have to go to the top. Usually the property manager that you wind up dealing with in a lease isn't the top. The decider is usually the landlord, person who actually owns the property. You won't get anywhere talking to the wrong person, right? I think many of you, in terms of negotiating or discussing things, you've all learned this, and it tends to get frustrating. So how do you get to the right person? You have to figure out exactly who that is. If you're dealing with a service establishment or a product-based thing, you can say, look, I've had some really great service here. Who can I contact to tell them about it? Right? Usually they're going to open up right then and say who the decider is. Well, by all means. Why? Because that person who's not the decider that you're talking to wants to look good in the eyes of the decider. So, great, go and tell them about me because I told them about you. Right? That should open the door to that person who can make a decision. That's a basic technique, a level of which can be applied anywhere you go. Successful key number 3. Don't get angry. As I said, first one who gets angry and gets mad loses. Always avoid confrontation. When it starts to get to that point, because you're not getting what you want, you won't get very far if the decision maker has to manage 2 problems: the negotiation and your behavior. Don't put them in that position. Avoid putting the decision maker in the position of feeling that they are not going to take that from you, right? Landlords, this is a real big one. You go in, get demanding, you don't have a real case, he's unsure about you from the start. You go in saying, well, that's not fair, that's not right, I need this, right? How do you expect me to start my business in your place if you won't, you're going to make me sign a personal guarantee and do a bunch of things that I don't want to do. Once you start going into that behavior, you're putting them in the position of, do I need to take this from you or can I go to somebody else that understands leasing? Key number 4, never negotiate in a crowd. If I had to negotiate with one of you here, I'm not going to do it in this setting. Right? Most negotiations need to be one-on-one affairs. So you've got to find that setting and make that work that way. And the reason is that because in any successful negotiation, one of the 2 parties or both is going to make a concession. And when they make that concession, they don't want to do that in front of everybody else. Why? Because then everybody else wants that concession. So you can't put them in a position where they're going to be embarrassed by agreeing to something that you're asking for. And number 5, you have to give in order to get, right? Give away something of lesser value to you or a greater real or imagined value to the other person. Sometimes giving something intangible like recognition or praise can get something more tangible in return, right? Such as the example of, hey, I've had some really great service here and I want to personally find somebody who I can thank for the way in which you handled me. That'll get you to the top in a hurry. You gave away something intangible, but you're actually getting to the decider, which in the end might be very tangible. Other times, give something tangible the other party will value, but that you can live without. To do that, you have to know what you can live without. Right? So in any negotiation, you have to know where your starting point is and what it is you can give away. And you have to have done some research about the other party to have at least some educated guesses, right? The difference between a swag and a wag. right? The wild ass guess as opposed to the scientific wild ass guess. I'm sure that's on tape too, so. But the point being is that you have to have done some research so that you can have a little bit of an understanding of where that other person might be coming from. To do that, you've got to think through solutions. Start by looking for the things, tangible and intangible, that the other party wants, needs, or might value. Identify the likely problem or barriers to a successful negotiation. The likely problem or the barriers to a successful negotiation. Where are they really going to stop? How badly do they want you? How bad do you want the space? We're talking about leasing. Think of the solutions. Be a problem solver, be creative, but not so creative that the other person cannot even understand where you're coming from, right? You can be so outlandish, they're going to look at you and say, no, I'm sorry. Fair enough? Okay, now we're going to move into commercial leasing. And by the way, we're going to talk about this. I've got several more slides on this topic. And then I really want to move into a Q&A so that it's going to raise, I presume, you may even want to jot them down. I see most of you have got note paper. Jot down any question or thing that comes up about it. As Thomas said, it's complicated, and so we'll do our best to get through it. I've probably negotiated over 3,000 leases in the last 10 years, probably closer to 15. I've owned my own property management business, and I spent years working for a major tenant-based landlord in 8 western states. I'm now, as my colleague John and I are, helping you, small business owners, potential small business owners, understand how to do this. It's a lot more fun than being the landlord because I get to educate you on how to handle these sorts of things. So, commercial lease negotiations. Here's the single biggest key. A commercial lease in the state of Washington is considered a commercial contract. There is no landlord-tenant law that says what has to be in a commercial contract or what's fair or what's unfair in a commercial contract. The law is whatever it says when you sign it and the other party signs it. That's the law. And that's what they can hold you to. Presumably, you've read it all, you understand it all. When I'm dealing with clients, the single biggest thing that causes my head to twitch is when they say, oh, I looked this over, it looks pretty standard to me, I think I'll just sign it. Unless you really understand it and have taken the time to study it, you simply can't take that approach. It's just not smart. But it does mean, since the law is whatever is in it, that everything in a commercial lease really is negotiable, even though a landlord or a property manager may imply or state that it's not. As a matter of fact, everything in that lease is negotiable. You've got to understand what are the things that are worth negotiating. What are the trade-offs? How does the landlord or the property manager calculate what those trade-offs are? One of the things that we'll wind up talking about here is that in a lease, like in anything else, at the end of the day, it's always about the money, right? It's always about the money. In a piece of property, commercial real estate, an owner has invested money in that property, real money. How do they get a return on that investment? That's the key to them. What should that return be? How are they going to find a way to make sure they maximize that return? They don't really care that much about your business. They only care about whether or not your business is going to be able to continually provide that return without a whole lot of trouble. So where's the best place for you to start? The best place for you to start is to really understand your own business, right? You were asking about cash flow earlier, brought that up. How does cash flow relate? Well, I use with my clients something that I refer to as margin management. If you take a look at this chart, I've got it identified as you're a really good business person or you're not so good a business person. If you're a good business person, your cost of goods sold, say you're selling something, consulting is a service rather than a product based, but let's just take a product based. The same rules can apply to service, but slightly different modifications. We'll start with product based. In a product-based business, cost of goods sold might run between 25% and 50%. That's the cost of the products that you're actually selling. Payroll might run between 10% and 30%. The lease, which is one of the top 4 largest categories for most small business owners, if not all small business owners, typically needs to run between 10%. Really good ones can get it down to 6 or 7% with a high of 15%. Here's a flat rule for you. In a product-based business, if the lease is more than 15%, you are not going to take home any money, right? Given the margins that are involved, that's a hard rule that we have learned well over time. All other, insurance, marketing, utilities, all those other costs, 10% to 15%. So you're a good manager, let's add up the good column, comes to 55%. You're a not so good manager, you add up the bad column, comes to 110%. How much is left for you and debt if you have any debt? Well, if you're a great manager and you manage all of these margins, including the lease, right, which is the one margin that's not variable here. All other 4 margins are relatively variable, right? The last one maybe a little less so, but relatively variable. You wind up with 45% left for you. That's if you do everything right. If you don't, you aren't paying attention, you don't understand your margins, you're at minus 10%. What does that mean? Anybody have any idea? You're feeding it, aren't you? Exactly right. And by the way, John and I deal with an awful lot of clients who are still feeding their businesses. Why the knowledge of leasing is important to business owners. Let's start with attorneys. Frequently through my years of dealing with certainly with tenants, clients who are trying to lease, you often get a document from them that says, signing this document has legal implications, you need to check with your attorney. Well, I can tell you for sure that I always advise a client to check with an attorney. However, you've got to understand that you can't let the attorney run your business for you. You're in business so that you'll run your business, not let the attorney. And the same, by the way, goes true for your insurance broker, your real estate broker, your CPA. They're all great at certain things. Taxes, real estate, market values, insurance, and the law, right? So yes, you should check with an attorney, but you can't turn the business strategy over to the attorney. Most of a lease is business strategy, not law. It's only law because you wrote it down there or agreed to what the landlord wrote down. So they practice law, but they're typically not trained in business skills. Business owners practice a separate set of business skills and are typically not trained in the law. In the end, the business owner has to determine what is the right course for his or her business. An attorney does not sign a contract, only you sign the contract. Got to keep that in mind, right? I refer to this with the people that I talk to as avoiding white coat syndrome, right? Most of you, and you know, probably been to a doctor once or twice, and if the doctor says, hey, John, take this prescription and come back and see me in 30 days. I've got 5 clients who are actually our doctors. By the way, I dealt with their leases, helped them with their leases. 5 clients who are doctors, and I ask them because I'm curious. 5% of their patients are only the amount that ever ask. 95% never ask, what's this actually going to do? How long am I going to have to take it? What happens if it doesn't work? How much is it going to cost? What are the alternatives? What are the side effects? Most people never ask those questions. They go ahead and do it. Why? I refer to that as white coat syndrome. But at the end of the day, who's in charge of your health? Only you. It's almost impossible because he gave you the wrong prescription or it didn't work for you to go and sue that doctor for malpractice. Almost impossible to do it. And most of you would never have the money to get that sort of a thing going unless it was a nationwide issue of some sort and you could do a class action suit. You're in charge of your health. The same thing is true with your business. You have to be the one who understands what's going on, and you have to make the decisions and you have to be in charge, right? Simple as that. Absolutely true in leasing. That's why we're talking about this today. What's the role of the real estate broker? Real estate brokers are very highly trained salespeople whose primary job it is to locate qualified tenants and get them emotionally involved in the space being offered. This puts most small business owners at a disadvantage. It's the truth. Do you know that a real estate broker under Washington real estate law is required to go through 40 hours of in-service training a year? Most of us would think that that has some basis in real estate transactions, real estate law. You know what that 40 hours is spent? Teaching them how to be better salespeople, almost across the board. If anybody here has been in real estate, it's about the selling process, right? And if you go into business, you're going to need to develop sales skills too. But the truth of the matter is that we have the best trained and most successful sales force ever existed in the history of the world here in this country. You need to know that about the people you're dealing with, right? Some chuckles, but you all know I'm right when I say that. So keep that in mind. All right, a letter of intent. If you start out in a lease, you should start out with a letter of intent. That should originate with you. If you choose to use a real estate broker who you are going to manage, you don't let the real estate broker manage you. One of the things that I like to tell my clients all the time is a person without a plan always gets managed by somebody else who has one. The landlord has a plan. The broker has a plan called commission. The landlord's plan is return on investment, right? You have to have a plan, and if you don't, you're going to get managed by those guys, whether they choose to represent you or not. Here's a key part. Should back up that one slide about brokers. In 99% of all commercial lease transactions, who pays the broker? The landlord. I believe very strongly, and having done thousands of leases, that people do what they get paid to do. So if you have a broker representing you, maybe a neighbor, maybe a relative, maybe somebody who you think is fabulous. We've dealt with quite a few cases of my nephew or my aunt or something. Bottom line is, they're getting paid a commission. They're going to do what they need to do to get that commission and to increase that amount of that commission. And believe me, they know the math. And most often, they're going to know the math faster than you do, right? If it's 5 or 6% of the total real estate of the entire lease deal, what does that include? Typically, it's 5 or 6% of the entire 5-year lease. You do all the math, including the increases over time. They calculate all that. They've actually got software they can put this in and immediately give the answer back to them. Because at the end of the day, they're going to go and bill the landlord for it. In fact, here's another little tip for you. They actually bill the landlord and expect to get paid the day you sign the lease. You all know why you have to have a security deposit in the first month's rent or more that same day? So that it covers the amount they have to pay the broker. That's why you have to pay it at that time. The landlord doesn't want to have to take money out of his pocket in advance of the rent to pay the broker. That's why they ask for that money up front. The broker gets it, or brokers if there's more than one involved. So your broker should help you with a letter of intent, but it needs to say what you need it to say, not just what they suggest it says. Who's the tenant? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. What specifically are the premises? The disclosures of financials and the business plan, right? And I'll kind of expound on these a bit. Use of the premises. What do you get to use it for? Lease and rent commencement. When does it actually start? Are there any options to renew, and what do those options say? What kind of deposits are you going to have to make? How much money are you going to need to come up with that day you start sign the lease before you've even opened your business? What is the additional rent? Thomas referred to that as triple net. There is, in most leases, not all, but most, something called triple net, or in the lease language most often, it's called additional rent. The triple nets, there's three. One is the common area maintenance. So could be parking, landscaping, exterior lighting, hallways, exterior of the building, general signage for a property that's not specific to you. All of that goes into the common area maintenance. Oftentimes, some level of the HVAC, heating systems, what have you, garbage collection, those types of things often go into the common area maintenance. The second net is the landlord's portion of insurance. The insurance that his lender, a bank, or if he owns it, he's still going to want to have it, insurance on the property for fire, earthquake, those sorts of things, as well as general liability in the common area, walking into the building and what have you. That insurance, the landlord is required to have, but the tenants pay for. The premise, the idea from the landlord's point of view is, well, I'm not the one using the building. The people using the building should pay for that. The same thing goes true for the third net, which is the property taxes. So the tenants collectively pay for the property taxes on a prorated basis for the building, the insurance on a prorated basis, and the common area maintenance. Those are the three nets that are referred to in a triple net. The landlord and tenants work. Are you going to do any tenant improvements? Is the landlord going to do any tenant improvements? What's the status of the HVAC, right? Heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. What's the status of that? How old is it? Who controls it? Does it control more than one space? What does the lease say about it? Termination rights and guarantee. Is there going to be a personal guarantee? Do you need tenant rights, tenants' rights relative to, or termination rights relative to asking for a clause that if your business starts out in the beginning of year 2, can you choose to terminate the lease? Say it's a 5-year lease. Can you terminate at the beginning of year 2 because things didn't work out the way you wanted to? I've seen this clause, and in fact, Pacific Place downtown requires that clause to go into all of their leases, where I first learned about it, because they don't want to have to deal with a tenant down there that's struggling. They'd rather get them out and get a better tenant in. Right? I think landlords should think that way. Pacific Place is the only one that I have ever seen do that, although we've been very successful in getting that clause inserted into other leases since. Parking and signage. We'll probably come back to this, but these are the things that you need to address in your letter of intent. So you've got I do have business cards for anybody that's interested in this, and I can send you a generic letter of intent if you ever want to use it for something that covers all of these issues. Now, in my experience, which I've been doing this for a while, what are the 2 areas, maybe 3, that are the most common areas of dispute after the lease is signed? Well, the first is the HVAC. It's too hot, it's too cold, who's paying for it? The second is parking. There have been more disputes over HVAC and parking after a lease is signed, in my experience, than anything else. And that's because they were not properly addressed before the lease was signed. And of course, it's always money, right? Are you paying on time? Are you paying the full amount? Is there any dispute over what the amount is? So what's worth negotiating in a lease? Right? This is probably not a complete list, but in a landlord's point of view, every one of these things at some point translates to money. Landlords, particularly savvy ones, today actually have software that enters all of these terms into it and calculates the extent that they're going to get a return on their original capital investment for the property. So they can weigh these things against each other. You're at a disadvantage because it's very hard for you to see how weighing these things against each other in terms of what the landlord really values, what you can possibly ask for in exchange for something else. So here's some things to talk about. Obviously the rent, options. Let me talk about options to renew. The options to renew, typically in a lease, landlords don't want to do those. Because if you follow all the terms of the lease, pay all the rent on time, follow all the other terms of the lease, at the end of your 5 years, or I actually should say sometimes 180 days before the end of your 5 years, you have the option to renew that lease, assuming that you negotiated that option before the lease was signed. Very hard to negotiate it afterwards. If you don't have an option, the landlord can decide, you're out, I'm going to bring in somebody else. If you have an option and you have followed all the terms of the lease, it's at your sole discretion. They cannot kick you out. Now, there may be some discussion over what the new rent's going to be, right? That can often be a deal breaker for one side or the other. But assuming that you can agree on the new rent and you've got some terms in your lease that identify what that new rent might be or how a dispute regarding it is going to get resolved, at the end of the day, you have access to that property and a right to stay there for whatever the option term is. For a new business, I always recommend starting with a 3-year term, which I have length of term down here, rather than a 5-year term. And then have multiple options to renew for successive 3-year terms. That gives you more windows to get out if you want, but if you choose to stay and you're willing to pay the rent, you can stay there through all those options. And then if you're a really good tenant, you may be able to completely renew a lease at the end of 10 years or whatever that time period winds up being. Make sense? What is a landlord going to do? Landlord's work. Right? I believe that every landlord should leave any space you're going to lease to be essentially a usable but empty shell. Right? It shouldn't be where you have to go in and put up drywall, finish everything out. Now, if you're a dentist, you're going to need to put in plumbing that works for you. You're going to need to put in electric that works for you. But the landlord should give you a working shell. There should be electrical available for lighting fixtures, maybe even lighting fixtures. Some sort of a ceiling in there, but that you could either choose to change out or not. Landlords don't like to negotiate much over tenant improvements. Oftentimes today, actually during the recession more so, they will provide what's known as a tenant improvement allowance. That's an incentive to get you in. Most often, 90% of the time, that tenant improvement allowance is used to help improve that premises to the point where it could be used by any tenant. What they don't like to do with the tenant improvement allowance is use it to pay for stuff that's unique to your business, because if you fail or you leave at the end of the lease term, they actually have to yank all that stuff out of there before they can lease it to somebody else. And they don't like to have to spend that money. So they will improve it typically to a point where they could actually lease that premises to just about anybody, right? Common shell basis, maybe lighting, maybe you can get some flooring, maybe you can get some improvements to a bathroom to make it ADA or what have you. Maybe you want 2 bathrooms, some of those kinds of things. So they'll upgrade, but typically only to the point where it's usable for anybody. Length of term, I spoke about that a minute ago. That's a real key thing for you to understand the negotiating capability. Tell you what, during the recession, I dealt with dozens who had signed 10-year leases, right? The recession hits, the gross income of the business drops way down, business is in trouble, and they've got a 10-year lease and they're stuck. Bad news. at the very worst, don't ever sign a lease over 5 years, right? Certainly not as a relatively new business. I mean, if you're a bigger business or a corporate business, but even as a franchise, I wouldn't do it, right? Even if the franchisor tells you, oh, you have to sign a 10-year lease, you don't want to do it. Insist on a 5-year or less, 3-year better. Personal guarantee. Today, most landlords want a personal guarantee, but let's talk about what that actually means. And we'll cover some more of the language here in a sec, but a personal guarantee is nothing more than your guarantee, personally, that you will follow all the terms of the lease and pay your rent. It's very, very hard for a landlord to enforce a personal guarantee. If you default, they have to sue you and they have to sue the business to be able to work on that personal guarantee. They have to find you wherever you are because presumably you've defaulted and you've moved out, abandoned the facility. They've got to find you, chase you down, take you to court, all those other things. They just as soon not do that. The single biggest value of a personal guarantee is to hammer over you. You better do what the lease says, pay on time, quit complaining, or I'll get you. That's the single biggest value of the personal guarantee to the landlord. One of the things that you can negotiate is, sure, I'll sign the personal guarantee, but after I've proven myself for 2 years, I want the personal guarantee to go away. Or I'm going to do a 3-year lease. I've got three 3-year options following that first 3-year term. After the first term, I want the personal guarantee to go away. You have to negotiate that up front. If you don't do it up front, it's very hard to enter this stuff later. Keep in mind that when you exercise an option to renew, you're not making a new lease. You're just renewing the old lease under all the terms that you negotiated the first time. Right?
Steve, you might just mention that they should try to get the lease in the name of the entity they formed.
Coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, very good point. There are other things, but these are all trade-offs that you can make, right, as a starter. You may come up with some others. All right, as John mentioned, you knew it was coming, all right? What are the important language elements in a lease? Kind of talk about these in greater detail. First, what are the legal entities? Keep in mind that if your business is an LLC or a corporation of any kind, when you create an LLC or a corporation, you are creating a whole new legal entity that in the eyes is different than you personally. Even today, I frequently have clients walking in where the lease is written between the landlord's LLC and some individual, right, the owner of the business. Well, if it is there a personal guarantee that's needed? No, because the individual signed the lease. It is the personal guarantee. You don't ever want to do that. If you're going to start a business, there's a lot of reasons to be an LLC or corporation. Talk to your SBDC advisor about that. But the lease needs to be in the name of the landlord's legal entity, LLC or corporation, and your legal entity, your LLC or corporation, right? Now, the landlord most likely is going to ask you to sign a personal guarantee on the back end of that, but that's then when you negotiate with them the length of term of that personal guarantee. Is there a full or a modified triple net? You have to understand how the prorated basis of a triple net works. Is there 20,000 square feet in the premises and you're renting 2,000 square feet? Does that mean that you get 10%? Most often you'll discover that there's ways in which the landlord likes to calculate that. A full service lease with triple net means that you're actually going to be paying closer to 12% or 13% because they are going to divide up the space of the common areas and give you that portion of the common area. That's called a full service triple net. Or if it's a non-full service triple net or just a straight triple net, then that means that the landlord is going to handle all the common area and you're going to get your 10% prorated out of it. I know that sounds a little bit confusing. I can help clarify that for you later when we get to it if you want. But there's various ways. How do you know? You have to read the lease, whatever it is the landlord is presenting. And we've been successful over the years that I've been doing this in negotiating. When I was a landlord, very successful because I kind of would tell the tenant how it's going to be, but savvy tenants would come back and push. But now that I've been working for the last 6, 7 years, 8 years representing tenants and clients, we've been very successful in negotiating all of these things back and forth, right? Another thing that you're going to discover is you go in and take a tape measure and the inside of your premises doesn't turn out to be 2,000 square feet. That's almost certainly going to happen. So what is it that you default to? Well, most of these leases right now, particularly with corporate entities, are based on BOMA standards. BOMA stands for the Building Owners and Managers Association, which is a separate association representing building owners and managers who set the standards for how these things get calculated. This is a great example here. They're going to calculate this all the way to the glass in the window, right? Particularly if you've got a full relight, goes all the way down. The actual square footage is going to get calculated, and this is going to be done on an architect's drawing rather than by tape measure in the place, right? So it's not going to be 2,000 square feet, it's going to be 2,200 square feet. Why does it matter? Because if your rent, base rent, is calculated on a square footage basis, they just got more rent, right? Can you come in and say, wait a minute, you say it's 2,200 square feet, my architect and we come in, we measure this thing, it's only 2,000 square feet, we want to get it adjusted to 2,000 square feet. Well, that's one of those things that you might be able to get in exchange for giving the landlord something else on that list that I had. There's a dozen different things that you can trade off back and forth in these discussions. How much will be due at lease signing? Is it going to be frequently, particularly during the recession, we had landlords asking for a security deposit, oftentimes greater than a month, because they like to have the security deposit being at least the amount of the last month's rent. Well, if they're going to do the last month's rent of a 5-year lease, they need to know what the escalations were all the way to that 5th year, right? And it might go up 3% a year. They don't like to use CPI. Thomas brought up the term CPI, as Consumer Price Index. You see that very, very seldom. Although I can share with you different ways in which you can negotiate that, but you see it very seldom, and here's why. Real important reason why. Because if you use CPI, nobody knows what that CPI is going to be over the next 5 years. Well, how are you going to calculate the broker's commission if you don't know? Right? The brokers never use CPI because they want a commission on that total amount. They don't want to have to guess what it's going to be. They want to be able to bill the landlord for a certain amount because they get paid on commission. So they like to use a set, stepped schedule, either a certain dollar amount increase each year or a percentage increase where it's easy to do the math. They know what the total lease value is. I get my 5 or 6% of it, write me the check. Can't do that if it's CPI. What is it that you want to do though? You want to be able to negotiate the CPI or 3%, whichever is less. You want to step in and make a hardball run to get CPI or 3%, whichever is less. Not very often the landlords will agree to that, but even if you do present it, you're demonstrating to them that you know a little bit about what you're talking about. Trust me, the escalations in a lease, particularly when they are above actual CPI, it's my belief a landlord isn't entitled to more than the CPI. Why should they get higher than the inflation rate in their lease, right? It doesn't mean that the building's that better. So they shouldn't get more than CPI. But they always are going to try. And oftentimes, particularly to people who are new at this, you're going to see 5, 6, and 7% annual escalations. You've got to actually, and they'll do that by not calling it 5, 6, or 7%. They'll do that by saying the first year the base rent is this dollar amount, $3,000. The next year, the base amount is $3,500. Well, whatever that percentage increase is, I'm not fast enough in my head on that, but it's more than the 3%, right? So that escalation, you actually have to do the math and calculate the percentage increase to know what they're trying to charge you. Oftentimes I sit down with tenants, clients who bring me a lease. They have a graduated step number in the escalations over the years. They haven't done the calculation. They had no clue that it was 6 or 7% until I pointed out and said, wait a minute, right? The landlord is actually giving you what he says is a really low lease rate the first year, but he's bumping it up in very large percentages the next set of years, the next 4 years, so that he can recoup what he thought was a really low base rent to start with, even though you were attracted to it because it was low, or at least you presume that it was low. But the reason why it's low is because that's what market rate is. He wouldn't be offering it if it was, right? If it wasn't market rate. So should he be getting more than that? No. You've got to do the math yourself. That's the knowledge that you have to have going into any further discussion on this. What are the various dates involved? And you've got to know how the lease might be written so that you understand the lease commencement, when you obtain possession, when the rent starts, when it terminates, and if there's an option to renew, what your window is to renew. All of those things are negotiable. When do you actually sign the lease? When do you actually start paying rent? Do you get some free months rent? Well, you sure should get some free months rent because it's going to take you at least 3 months to get in there and get set up. And then you should ask for more than that because in your first 2 months, you aren't going to be making much money because nobody knows you're there yet, unless you've got a real winning business model and people are lined up the day you open for business. I haven't seen that too many times, but sometimes it's happened, right? So you've got to pay attention to those things. Each one is different. Let me tell you the single biggest key here, though, about the difference between the start of the rent and the lease commencement. Once you sign the lease, all the terms of the lease are fully active, including those that say that you are liable for anything that happens on the property in that premises. If your construction guy burns down the premises because he, left his propane thing running, you're responsible. You might be able to go after the construction guy, but you signed that lease, even though you haven't started paying rent yet. So the liability starts when the lease is signed, not when the rent starts. Big, big difference. And your insurance needs to start when the lease is signed, not when the rent starts. Big one is allowable use. Have this discussion with almost every single client that comes to us. Retail store for shoes. Well, are you going to sell any clothing? No, it didn't say you can sell clothing, it said you can only sell shoes. Right? What about heart monitors and whatever else might go along with socks and everything else? You've got to make it as broad as you possibly can. Think of everything that you might do or you might do within 5 years or even 10 years if you've got options to renew. You have to have that window open because it's a whole lot harder to go back and say, Mother, may I later. Once you sign the lease, it's pretty much locked in. Any changes have to be in the written approval of the landlord. And you too, but you're asking for the change. So you're already approving. They have to approve. Alterations, repairs, signage, and assignment. Almost every lease, 98% of them say you cannot sublease, you cannot assign it, and if you go out of business in year 2 of a 5-year lease, you don't get to just sell the business to somebody because you can't sell the lease, right? So you can't just do that. I had this conversation just yesterday with a client. Well, wait a minute, I'm selling my business. Can't I just assign the lease over? Went down to clause 13, it said you cannot assign the lease. No, the landlord can approve that, but most often, if you want to get out after 2 years or 3 years and you've got 2 or 3 or 4 more years to go or whatever it might be, and you find somebody who wants to buy the business, the landlord has to approve that person, and then most often today, they're going to keep you on the hook anyway, right? Even if you're no longer in the business, you've sold the business, you're still going to be responsible for the lease. So if the person who bought the business quits paying, the landlord's going to come after both of you. Complicated stuff, but what are the insurance requirements? I've seen this escalate like crazy over the last 10 years. Was $500,000, now we're up to $5 million. What's the impact on you? Well, are you going to have $1 million claim? Are you going to have a $3 million claim? Are you going to have a $500,000 claim? Sure, all those go up and you need to be covered. But every one of those increases is, another $1,000 a year, $2,000 a year or more in your insurance cost. You've got to factor that into your cash flow forecasting, which you can do with your SBDC advisor. But you've got to factor that into it, right? What is the insurance requirement that you're going to have to agree to on the lease? I've negotiated that down in many leases. All right, the personal guarantee. As I mentioned before, we really kind of covered this. Who are the parties in the lease? If the parties in the lease are you as a person and their LLC, it is a personal guarantee. If the parties in the lease are your LLC and their LLC, then there's a personal they may ask you to sign a personal guarantee, probably, right? It can be negotiable if the tenant's established corporation or longstanding community business. I've seen that happen many times. The length of time of a personal guarantee can sometimes be negotiated if all the other factors are strong, right? You've got a great business plan, you've had a track record in business, you know what you're doing, you're signing the lease, right? Those are all things that you can put into play to demonstrate the fact that you're a real good risk for the landlord. Landlords are going to treat you like you are getting a bank loan, which arguably in the case of a lease, it's a lot like that. So you've got to think that oftentimes they're going to try and suggest to you or actually treat you as though you are applying for this loan. I want your financials, I want your tax returns, I want your entire business plan. Well, I just need to tell you, those are things you cannot just hand over. You may have to hand over tax returns if you're an existing business, right? You might even have to hand over a tax return or two if you're not an existing business, but you should be really careful about doing that and negotiating it from the standpoint of how does that really apply to the business, right? What would you actually do with it? You don't have to give it to them just because they ask for it. You can question why that is. When they say we want your financials, most landlords really never state what a financial is. Is that a profit and loss, a balance sheet, cash flow statement? What is it? Well, most of them are going to come back and say, well, give me your income statement. Well, the income statement is the profit and loss statement. And why do they want that? Because they want to know how much you can pay in rent. That's why they want it. Don't give that to them. You can give them your projected gross revenue. Here's how good our business is going to be. And here's why we think it's going to be that good. Here's the market research data that demonstrates why you should lease this property to us. But you don't give them all your expenses ever. If you do that, they're going to know how much they think they can get you in the rent. Right? Just don't do that. Okay. What happens if you default? Here's a little part of the law, in a sense that most people don't know, well established in case law. The landlord is going to typically file a lawsuit. If it's going to be if there's a personal guarantee, they'll file a lawsuit against the corporate entity that you have, the LLC or the corporation, and you personally. Going to have both served. With the corporation, they're going to have it served to the registered agent. Hopefully that's not you. In many cases it is, shouldn't be. The attorney will hire a process server who's going to go out and try and find you. Then you've got 20 days after that service has been served, right? The lawsuit has been served to you. You've got 20 days. You pretty much have to hire an attorney. The court doesn't want to hear from you. The court wants to hear from your attorney. And so what you've got to do is go out and hire an attorney and then take that and make sure that you have a really good response within that 20 days. Here's why we defaulted. And here's why it's really the landlord's fault. That's the case you need to make. Everybody can make that case. Maybe it's weak, but you should make the case. Right? Depending on how weak it is, the landlord then is still, after you've filed that response with the court, the landlord is still going to come back and try and file for a summary judgment. Well, Your Honor, that's a really weak case. That's just BS. I need a summary judgment. You're going to be notified of the motion for summary judgment. When you get notified, you need to respond to that. If you respond to that with an even better case, based upon how the correspondence has gone back and forth, it's going to get set for a hearing. Those are typically often a year or a year and a half out. So during that time frame, when you're way out there, the court is going to expect both parties to try and negotiate a resolution. They don't like to actually see you come in for the hearing. So the expectation is going to be that you negotiate some sort of a resolution before you get there. Okay. You sure glad you asked me to come, Thomas?
No, this is some great stuff. I mean,
After all that.
Important stuff that we need to know.
Yeah.
And even though if you don't master it, at least you have some idea of what's going on with the lease. So we're at Q&A now?
We are.
I have a Q&A.
All right.
Or I have a Q.
Yeah.
I don't have an A.
We'll see if I've got an A.
But I'm a former banker, and Frank can probably attest to this. Every time we put a deal together, the landlord waiver, how come the landlord never wants to sign that damn thing? Because all the banks wants to do is go back and get their collateral, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, talk about a win-win negotiation. Why should a landlord want to sign it?
Because their clients will get a loan and go into the building.
No, I'll just find another client, another tenant.
Come on, you gotta help me out.
Yeah, I know. Got to think where the landlord's at.
Okay.
By the way, in any lease negotiation, right, whether it's that kind of a term or anything else, the only real leverage you have, I mean, I can't get more to the bottom line than this. The only leverage you have is your willingness to walk away. Period. If you aren't willing to do that, you're done. You might as well sign the thing. Right? Very hard to negotiate if you aren't willing to walk away. How are you going to know to walk away? Or how are you going to have the ability to walk away if you aren't looking at 2 or 3 or 4 places? Right? You got to have options. You need options. When you negotiate, offer options. People like options. So, it's not a real straightforward answer to your question, but at the end of the day, the landlord doesn't have any actual incentive to do that other than the client or the tenant or the borrower has to go back to the landlord and say, we've gone through all these negotiations. I've told you up front I'm getting a loan. The bank really needs to be in a position where they can come in and be able to have a lien on the assets. They're going to have it anyway. And if I default on even with you or with you, they want to be able to come in and get the stuff. Well, of course, the landlord wants to be able to keep that stuff too, right? Because the lease says that if you abandon the property or default on the lease, I can come in and have that. So question then becomes a discussion of who's going to be in first place on that. And I've seen this happen many, many times where the landlord and the banks are fighting each other over it. It's actually pretty common.
Are you seeing much abated rent in leases that are signed recently?
Abated rent.
Yeah, so maybe like 1 month per year, something like that.
I don't think no.
No?
No. You can negotiate some free months up front, right?
Okay.
And you should negotiate a little bit more than, a couple months more than the amount of time it's going to take you to get open for business. But a free month a year, I don't think I've seen that kind of a lease in any time in the last 10 years. Good question. All right, we talked about a lot.
Any questions?
One thing that still seems to be missing. Go ahead.
So you mentioned that landlords don't like to renew after the first 5 years.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they love to have a tenant, just a staple? I mean, aren't there costs associated with getting new tenants? What's the hang up there for them?
The hang up there for them is it reduces their options.
Okay.
If they like the tenant, they'll just renew the lease. See, the option is the tenant's sole discretion. The landlord can't say no. Well, maybe the landlord does, maybe they don't. But they'd much rather have that option, right? So if they like the person, they'll say, great, let's do another 5 year. If they don't like the person, so they really view options to renew as a cost rather than a benefit.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
You can't
good
write-
question.
You can't write that so it's an option on either side.
Then it's not an option,
Well, I mean, one decides,
right?
one doesn't.
I mean, you can, but
Right.
then it's not really an option.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you seeing 3% kind of in the office markets or in industrial, or what's for rent risers over the course of the coming years?
Well, it's every landlord wants to do it differently.
Uh-huh.
What I do see very, very seldom is CPI. That's the main thing. Whether or not during the recession, I saw, as I mentioned, landlords who were coming in with low rents to start and then huge bumps. I mean, everybody believing that the recession wasn't going to last very long. And this business coming in 2009 was going to be doing that much greater by 2010 or 2011, and they'd be able to pay greater rent. And of course, that didn't happen, right? So a lot of people signed those kind of leases, but shouldn't have. I think if there's a most common, it's going to be a 3% or some sort of a set stepped increase.
We mostly work with like SIBA leases. With like SIBA leases? Is that
See,
The consumer, the Commercial Brokers Association?
yeah, well, what type of leases do you typically deal with, or?
Yeah, well, I don't typically write the leases. By the way, so that you all know, full disclaimer, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a CPA, right? All I am is a guy who's been doing leases for a long, long time and helping people with them and doing them myself. I was certainly a landlord for a long time. So that being said, I see all kinds of leases, right? I recommend that if a client is unsure about the lease that a landlord gives them, the best thing that they can do is go back and ask for the standard CBA lease, which stands for the Commercial Brokers Association. Of all the leases out there, none of them are written in favor of the tenant. I'll just say that right up front. None of them are. The one that is probably the most evenly handed, or generally speaking, evenly handed, is the CBA lease. So I highly recommend that you go right into the negotiation, typically even in your letter of intent, and say, we want to be able to do a CBA lease. Right? Very few people know how to ask for that.
Any more
That's a
questions?
great question.
Any more questions? No more questions? Hey, thank you so much. The intention of this talk isn't to get you become an expert and just give you some tools to work with, correct? So at least you're going in there, when or if you're going to sign a lease, you know what to look for. And knowing that you have every right to negotiate. You don't have to go and say, hey, okay, I'm going to take it and run. And all of a sudden, you're on the bad column where your business is 110% and, and you're not cash flowing, you're not able to make your rent. So we don't want that. But thank you so much to be part of the UW Tacoma
Yeah, you
community,
bet.
and hopefully you'll come back and next
Yeah,
year and stuff to talk.
Yeah,
But
you bet.
for your hard work and time, here's a can opener.
All right.
And also,
I need one of those.
and also a UW Tacoma coffee mug. So
All right.
hopefully you'll remember us when you drink your coffee or tea in the
I
morning.
like Tacoma right here, right? That's
Yeah,
great.
That's Tacoma.
That's great.
Hey, thank you so much, sir. I
You bet.
appreciate your
Thank you.
time.